Alexander Kane was a billionaire who pretended to be blind, but what he uncovered wasn't just betrayal. It was a secret so deadly, it could destroy his entire empire. Why would the woman he loved plot against him? How far would she go? And what terrifying truth was hiding behind her lies? The silence inside Alexander Kane's Lagos mansion was deceptive. To anyone else, the marble halls, golden chandeliers, and serene glow of wealth would feel like a palace of peace. But to Alexander, it had become a battlefield, one where every whisper, every laugh, every shadow carried a threat. Earlier that day he had confirmed what he dreaded most. Elena, the woman he had once trusted with his heart and his name, wasn't just unfaithful. Her betrayal had teeth. It carried purpose, calculation, and the scent of a deeper conspiracy. She wasn't sneaking around for love. She was scheming. Sitting in his black leather chair, tinted glasses reflecting the soft light of the chandeliers, Alexander looked every bit the blind billionaire. Calm, vulnerable, unaware. But behind the glasses, his sharp eyes burned with fury and focus. His disguise had given him an edge, and with that edge he had seen enough to know his wife was hiding something beyond infidelity. Upstairs, Elena's laughter pierced the silence. It wasn't the warm, joyous laugh of the woman he had once lifted out of obscurity, the young graduate he had adored for her ambition and wit. No. This laugh was sharp, cruel, filled with the kind of arrogance that comes from believing you're untouchable. She thought he couldn't see her late-night whispers on the phone. She thought he didn't notice how her body tensed when certain names were mentioned at charity galas. She thought the man behind the glasses was broken. But Alexander Kane hadn't built his empire by being blind to ambition, or betrayal. And yet, as he sat alone in the vast living room, he felt a sting that no amount of wealth could numb. He remembered their beginnings, Elena standing in a crowded university hall, fire in her eyes as she spoke of her dreams. He had loved her fire, believed in it, invested in it. But now that fire burned against him. Alexander's jaw tightened. He couldn't strike yet. If Elena knew he could see, he would lose his only advantage, the illusion of weakness. So he replayed her whispers in his mind. Words like daggers, he'll never see it coming. I'll deliver everything soon. And then there was the voice. A man's voice. Low, commanding. Familiar. Too familiar. It clawed at his memory like a ghost. If it was who he suspected, then this wasn't just Elena's betrayal, it was blood. Family. Alexander leaned forward, his hands gripping the chair's edges as his heart slowed into cold, controlled beats. For now, his weapons were silence, deception, and time. But he swore to himself, Elena's secrets would not stay buried. He whispered under his breath, the words laced with steel. You think I'm blind, Elena, but I see everything. The mansion slept, but the night did not. Lagos hummed outside with distant car horns and the restless rhythm of the city, yet inside the Kane estate, silence ruled, except for a single hushed voice. Alexander Kane lay on the vast silk sheets of his king-sized bed, his body still, his tinted glasses resting neatly on the bedside table. To anyone watching, he was the picture of vulnerability, a billionaire turned helpless, asleep in the blindness of the night. But Alexander wasn't sleeping. His breathing was steady, controlled, rehearsed. Every fiber of his body was alert, his sharp ears tuned to the soft whispers coming from across the room. Elena. She stood by the tall glass window, framed by the pale glow of the moonlight, her emerald nightgown shimmering faintly against her dark skin. In her hand, her phone glowed dimly, pressed close to her lips as she whispered words Alexander wasn't supposed to hear. Yes, it's almost time. Her voice was low, deliberate. No, he suspects nothing. He still believes I love him. Alexander's chest tightened, though his face betrayed nothing. He had perfected the mask of blindness, no flicker in his eyes, no twitch in his body. He remained stone, a man asleep. I'll have the documents soon, Elena continued, her tone dripping with secrecy. And when I do, everything he built, everything he owns, will belong to us. Alexander's hand, hidden beneath the sheets, curled into a fist. Documents. So this wasn't just about betrayal of the heart. It was about his empire, his wealth, his name, the legacy he had spent decades carving out of sweat, risk, and brilliance. And then it happened. A sound he knew too well. The man's voice. The same low, commanding tone he had heard before, the one that had haunted him since the first night he suspected Elena's betrayal. The voice that once sat across his dinner table. The voice of blood. Be careful, Elena, the man said from the other end of the call. If Alexander ever finds out, it won't just be his empire you'll lose. It'll be your life. Elena laughed softly, cruelly. He's blind. He'll never see it coming. For the first time in years, Alexander felt a chill crawl down his spine. Not because of fear but because the voice on the other end belonged to someone he thought he had buried in the past. His own brother. The brother he hadn't spoken to in over 20 years. The brother who had sworn to destroy him. Alexander's jaw clenched in the darkness. He had suspected. Now he knew. His enemy wasn't just outside. His enemy had been inside his home, inside his bed, inside his life all along. And as Elena's whispers faded into the night, Alexander's mind sharpened into a single burning thought. They think I am blind. But soon they will see the storm I bring. The morning sun spilled golden light across the Kane estate, illuminating marble floors and casting sharp reflections through the tall glass windows. Servants moved quietly, tending to their duties, careful not to disturb their master. At the center of the grand dining hall sat Alexander Kane, dressed in a crisp white shirt and navy trousers, his tinted glasses back in place. He held a porcelain cup of black coffee between his hands, the steam rising like a quiet storm. His posture was relaxed, yet his silence commanded the entire room. To Elena he was still the blind billionaire, helpless, unaware, easy to manipulate. She swept into the dining hall in a flowing cream dress, her gold earrings catching the morning light. She leaned down, kissed Alexander lightly on the cheek, and slid gracefully into the chair opposite him. "Good morning, my love," she said, her tone sweet but laced with something Alexander could now hear more clearly, mockery. Alexander smiled faintly, tilting his head as though listening carefully. His eyes, hidden behind the tinted glasses, focused not on her face but on her every movement. Every flick of her fingers. Every pause in her breath. He was studying her the way a hawk studies prey. "Good morning, Elena," he replied softly, his voice steady. "Did you sleep well?" Elena nodded, reaching for her phone, trying to appear casual. "Like a baby." Alexander took a slow sip of coffee. He let the silence linger, heavy enough to force her into filling it. He wanted to hear what she wouldn't say. "And you?" Elena asked after a beat, shifting uncomfortably under the weight of his quietness. I dreamed," Alexander said. He let the words hang in the air. "Strange dreams. Voices I thought I'd never hear again." Elena froze for a fraction of a second. It was subtle, too subtle for most. But Alexander noticed. The slight tightening of her jaw. The faint twitch in her hand. She knew exactly which voice he was hinting at. "Dreams don't mean anything, Alexander," she said quickly, forcing a laugh. But Alexander's calm smile never faltered. He leaned back in his chair, appearing every bit the blind, oblivious husband. Inside, however, his mind was racing. He couldn't confront her, not yet. The game was about patience. The hunter didn't spring the trap at the first sign of prey. He waited until the prey walked willingly into the cage. Instead, Alexander shifted the subject, his voice casual but laced with meaning. "You know, Elena, sometimes blindness is a gift. It teaches you to listen. To feel what others cannot see." Elena blinked, startled, but quickly recovered. "That's profound," she murmured, glancing back down at her phone. Alexander finished his coffee in silence, but his heart was a storm. He now had confirmation. Elena and his brother were moving against him. They wanted his empire, his legacy. But they had underestimated him. For every whisper they shared, for every secret they thought hidden, Alexander was already building a plan. A plan not just to protect his empire, but to bring both betrayers to their knees. And as Elena scrolled through her phone, thinking she held all the power, Alexander thought to himself, "Let them think I am blind. When I strike, it will be with eyes wide open." The Kane mansion grew quieter as the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the marble corridors. Elena had left for her usual charity meeting, a euphemism Alexander now understood too well. Richard would likely be there, waiting with his smug smile, weaving yet another layer of betrayal. Alexander stood at the window of his private study, the tinted glasses hiding the sharp awareness in his eyes. His reflection on the glass looked like that of a man broken, blind, defeated. But behind the facade, Alexander was calculating, each thought a blade sharpened against his enemies. On the mahogany desk before him lay an old leather-bound journal. He opened it with deliberate care, flipping past notes of business deals, architectural sketches of his real estate empire, and pages filled with Elena's name, back when he still believed in love without suspicion. Then his hand paused on a faded photograph tucked into the back cover. It was a picture of a younger Alexander standing beside a stern-faced man in military uniform, Colonel Ibrahim Durojiyi. Once a loyal friend, later a rival. A man whose brilliance and strategy had helped Alexander secure land and influence during the early years of his empire. But greed and pride had torn them apart, and they hadn't spoken in over a decade. Alexander ran his fingers over the photo. Sometimes the enemies of the past become the allies of the future, he murmured. He reached for the sleek black satellite phone hidden inside the desk drawer. It was untraceable, one of the last gifts from Durojiyi before their fallout. Alexander hesitated for only a second before dialing the encrypted line. The phone rang once, twice. Then a gravelly voice answered. Alexander Kane, the voice said slowly, almost with disbelief. I thought you were too proud to call me again. Alexander's lips curled into the faintest smile. Pride has no use when betrayal walks through your own home, Ibrahim. There was a pause on the other end. Then a low chuckle. So the great Kane finally bleeds. Not yet, Alexander replied, his voice sharp. But I will if I don't move carefully. My wife, my brother, they think I'm blind. They think they've won. And you want my help? Durojiyi asked. I want your silence first, Alexander said. Then your strategy. You've always had a gift for seeing the traps others fail to notice. I need that now. Another pause. Then Durojiyi's voice hardened. If I help you, Kane, it won't be for free. Alexander expected nothing less. Then name your price when the empire is safe. For now, I need your eyes where mine pretend not to see. The colonel let out a slow breath. Very well. Send me proof. Show me their betrayal, and I'll show you how to turn it into their destruction. As the line went dead, Alexander placed the phone back in the drawer, his hands steady. The past had returned, not as a haunting but as a weapon. For the first time since the accident, a dangerous glimmer lit his eyes. Elena and Richard thought he was vulnerable, powerless. But now, the most ruthless strategist he had ever known was about to join the game. And in this game, Alexander Kane never lost. The Lagos night sky glittered with city lights as though mocking the quiet tension brewing inside the Kane empire. In a modest apartment far from the luxury of Alexander's mansion, Colonel Ibrahim Durojiyi sat at a plain wooden desk, reviewing a series of encrypted messages and surveillance reports. He was a man of shadows now, no longer in uniform but still commanding the discipline and ruthlessness of his military past. His network of informants stretched across the city, drivers, security guards, waiters in upscale restaurants, ordinary people invisible to the powerful, yet deadly effective when properly paid. Tonight, their whispers painted a portrait of betrayal that even Durojiyi found unsettling. Richard Kane had been seen dining with an oil magnate known for hostile takeovers. Elena had met discreetly with a banker, arranging for funds to be transferred into an account in Dubai. And in the quiet corner of an exclusive Victoria Island lounge, both Elena and Richard had been overheard discussing something that made even hardened informants shiver. When he's gone completely, Richard had whispered, we move fast. Consolidate the board. Elena takes his seat as grieving widow. I'll step in to handle the finances. No one will question us. Not when the world believes Alexander Kane is a broken man. Elena had smiled then, clinking her glass of champagne against Richard's. And when the empire is ours, we'll be unstoppable. Durojiyi leaned back in his chair, the cigarette between his fingers burning slowly. He had expected betrayal, yes, but the coldness in Elena's words unsettled even him. This was no mere affair. It was a coup. Pulling out a secure recorder, he replayed the grainy audio of their conversation. He knew this was the proof Alexander needed, the kind of weapon that, in the right hands, could destroy reputations and shatter alliances. But the colonel was not done. He wanted more. Proof of intent wasn't enough. He needed evidence of action. The next morning, as the Kane mansion buzzed with its usual rhythm, Alexander sat alone in his study when the secure line rang. He answered quickly, his voice calm, but his chest tight with anticipation. Ibrahim? I've seen enough to confirm what you feared, Durojiyi replied. They're not just betraying you in love, Alexander. They're planning to strip you of your empire. Your brother wants your throne, and your wife wants the crown beside him. Alexander said nothing, his grip tightening on the armrest of his chair. I have recordings, the colonel continued. But more importantly, I've traced movements of your assets. They're moving money as we speak. If you don't act soon, Kane, you won't just lose a wife. You'll lose everything you've built. A silence stretched between them before Alexander spoke, his voice cold and deliberate. Then it's time to set the first trap. Durojiyi allowed himself a thin smile. I thought you'd say that. Tell me, Kane, How far are you willing to go? Alexander leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the marble floor like a predator preparing to strike. Farther than they ever imagined. The call ended. And in that moment the war for the Kane Empire truly began. The following evening, the Kane mansion glowed under chandeliers that scattered light across polished marble floors. A dinner had been arranged, small, intimate, just Alexander, Elena, and Richard. It was Elena's suggestion, an attempt to lift Alexander's spirits. But Alexander knew better. Durogiya's warning echoed in his mind, "They're moving money as we speak." He arrived at the dining room slowly, walking with a silver cane he did not need, his tinted glasses catching the golden light. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated to reinforce the illusion of helplessness. Elena rose to greet him, her emerald dress shimmering under the lights. "Darling," she said sweetly, pulling out his chair. "You look strong tonight." Richard was already seated across the table, his tailored gray suit sharp, his smile sharper. "Brother," he said warmly, too warmly, "it's good to see you joining us. You've been isolated lately." Alexander lowered himself into the chair, his expression unreadable. "Blindness has a way of isolating," he said softly, letting the weight of the word linger. Dinner began. Silverware clinked against porcelain, the soft hum of conversation filling the space. Elena spoke of charity projects. Richard spoke of market downturns and the need for new leadership to protect the empire. Their voices dripped with subtle manipulation, carefully chosen words meant to plant seeds of doubt. Alexander listened in silence, nodding occasionally as though barely following the conversation. But in truth, every word was a dagger he tucked away, every glance a map of their intentions. Then he made his move. "I had a visitor today," Alexander said suddenly, his tone casual. Both Elena and Richard froze, their forks pausing mid-air. "A visitor?" Elena asked quickly, forcing a smile. "Who, darling?" Alexander tilted his head as though lost in thought. "An old friend. Someone I haven't spoken to in years. He reminded me that blindness sharpens other senses. That what you cannot see you can still hear." The words hung heavy in the air. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Elena forced another laugh. "That's poetic." Alexander leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but piercing. "Do you believe in fate, Elena?" "Richard." Richard cleared his throat. "Fate is what you make it, brother." Alexander nodded slowly, then let out a faint sigh, returning to his food as though the matter had ended. But his words had been a test, and their reactions told him everything he needed. Their nervous laughter, their faltering voices, they were afraid. Later that night, when Elena excused herself to take a call and Richard followed a few minutes after, Alexander remained seated, his cane resting against the table. Alone, he removed his tinted glasses, revealing eyes sharp and calculating. He whispered to himself, "The trap is set." Outside, in the shadows near the mansion gates, a black SUV idled quietly. Inside sat Colonel Durogiyi, watching, recording, waiting. The colonel's voice crackled over the secure line hidden in Alexander's pocket. "They're taking the bait, Kane. Tomorrow they'll move faster. Keep pretending and they'll expose themselves completely." Alexander smiled faintly. "Good. Let them think they are the hunters. They have no idea they're already in the cage." The humid Lagos night buzzed with energy as the neon lights of Victoria Island painted the skyline. In an exclusive rooftop lounge overlooking the Atlantic, Elena and Richard sat in a corner booth, clinking glasses of champagne. Their laughter carried the careless arrogance of conspirators who believed victory was already theirs. "You saw him tonight," Elena whispered, leaning close, her gold earrings brushing against Richard's cheek. "He's broken. That talk about fate? That was just desperation. He doesn't even suspect." Richard smirked, his eyes scanning the crowded lounge to ensure no one was listening. Alexander may have been ruthless once, but now? He's a blind man clinging to shadows. The board is restless. They're ready for a change. By next quarter we'll have everything signed over. Elena's lips curled into a satisfied smile. "And when that happens, we disappear. Dubai. Our own empire. No one will question the grieving widow and the loyal brother." They clinked glasses again, sealing their treachery. But they weren't alone. At a nearby table, disguised in casual clothes, sat two of Colonel Durogiya's operatives. Their hidden mics picked up every word, every laugh, every detail. By the time Elena and Richard ordered a second bottle of champagne, the recording had already been sent to the colonel's encrypted servers. Across the city in his dimly lit safe house, Duroji listened with growing satisfaction. The voices of betrayal played through his speakers like a symphony of arrogance. He jotted down notes, marking key phrases. Board is restless. By next quarter, Dubai. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a coup. A meticulously timed one. He lit a cigarette, the ember glowing in the dark, and muttered, "They're digging their own graves." Back at the Kane mansion, Alexander sat in his study, pretending to nap in the leather chair. But in reality he was listening to the colonel's live feed through the hidden earpiece tucked into his ear. Every cruel laugh, every word about his blindness, cut into him like a knife. But instead of rage, Alexander felt something colder: clarity. They believed he was powerless. They believed the empire was already theirs. That arrogance was the noose he would tighten around their necks. Later that night, Elena slipped into bed beside him, her perfume lingering with the faint scent of champagne. She kissed his cheek and whispered, "Good night, darling." Alexander did not move. He lay still, his breathing even, his body calm. To her he was asleep, blind, oblivious. But behind the tinted glasses resting on the nightstand, Alexander's eyes were open, glowing faintly in the moonlight. "Sleep well, Elena," he thought. "Because soon your dreams will turn into nightmares." And as the city outside pulsed with life, the invisible war inside the Kane Empire crept closer to its reckoning. The morning sun bathed the Kane estate in golden light, but inside the mansion, tension crackled like a storm about to break. Alexander Kane sat at the long mahogany dining table, dressed in a simple white shirt, his tinted glasses firmly in place. In front of him, untouched, was a plate of breakfast that had long gone cold. Elena entered, her silk robe flowing, a mask of concern painted across her face. "Alexander, you barely touched your food. You need strength." Alexander's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Strength means little when your empire begins to crumble." The words hit her like a spark. For a second, her mask slipped, revealing a flicker of excitement before she quickly recovered. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. Alexander leaned back, sighing heavily. "Investments, bad deals, the board is restless. My advisors say we may not withstand the next quarter. Perhaps I've held on too long." His voice cracked just enough to sell the illusion of defeat. Elena's eyes lit up before she could stop herself. She leaned forward, her hand brushing his arm in mock comfort. "Darling, don't talk like that. You've built an empire. Maybe it's time to let others help." Alexander tilted his head slightly, listening, pretending to hesitate. "Others? Like Richard?" She froze just for an instant. Then she forced a smile. "He's your brother. Who else could you trust?" Alexander gave a slow nod as though considering it, before letting silence swallow the room. He wanted her to believe she was winning. He wanted her to taste victory before it was ripped away. That afternoon Richard arrived at the mansion. His confidence was unshakable, his gray suit pressed sharp, his cologne heavy. He embraced Elena too tightly for siblings-in-law, then strutted into Alexander's study. "Brother," Richard said warmly, "I hear times are difficult." Alexander sat hunched in his chair, the picture of a weary, broken man. "I've lost control," he murmured. "The empire may not survive." Richard leaned forward, his smile slick. "Then let me shoulder the burden. Let me protect the family legacy. Step aside, Alexander, and I'll ensure everything you've built endures." Alexander turned his face toward Richard, his tinted glasses reflecting the light. "And what if I refuse?" Richard's smile hardened. "Then you'll lose everything. And Elena, she'll suffer too. Is that what you want?" The venom in his voice was barely masked, but Alexander stayed perfectly still, perfectly calm. He allowed the silence to stretch until Richard shifted, mistaking it for weakness. "Think about it," Richard said finally, patting his brother's shoulder before leaving the room. As the door shut, Alexander's hand slid to the hidden earpiece in his pocket. Duroji's voice crackled through, low and steady. "He's taking the bait. They both are. They'll push hard now, Kane. Hard enough to give us everything we need." Alexander allowed himself a small, dangerous smile. "Good. The hunter never strikes until the prey is convinced the trap isn't there." Outside the study, Elena and Richard whispered urgently in the hallway, already plotting how to force Alexander into signing over his shares. They thought the empire was collapsing. But in truth, the empire was never stronger, because its true master had just lured them to the edge of the cliff. The Kane Group headquarters towered above the Lagos skyline, its glass walls gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Inside the boardroom, a storm brewed. Every director was present, seated around the long polished table, murmuring anxiously about rumors of the empire's decline. At the head of the table sat Alexander Kane, his tinted glasses in place, his hands folded calmly. He looked every bit the weary man they expected him to be. Elena sat behind him, her emerald gown whispering power, while Richard stood tall, confident, exuding the arrogance of a man who believed victory was already his. Richard cleared his throat, silencing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "the Kane Empire is in crisis. Under Alexander's leadership, profits have plunged, partnerships have weakened, and the future of this company is at risk." Gasps rippled through the boardroom. Richard continued, his voice commanding. "But there is a solution. With your support, I am prepared to take over as acting chairman and restore this empire before it collapses completely." All eyes turned to Alexander. He remained silent, unmoving. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke with a soft, pitiful tone. "My husband is a great man, but his health, and his blindness, have weakened him. He can't carry this burden anymore. Please, for the sake of the company, let Richard lead." Whispers broke out. The directors exchanged worried looks. A few nodded in agreement. The coup was unfolding exactly as Elena and Richard had planned. Then Alexander finally moved. Slowly he removed his tinted glasses and placed them on the table. For the first time in years, the board saw his piercing, unclouded eyes. The room froze. "Blindness," Alexander said softly, his voice steady, "is a convenient excuse, isn't it? But here's the truth. I was never blind. I let them believe it. I let them think I was weak. And in that weakness, they revealed who they really are." Elena's hand jerked back as if burned. Richard's face paled. Alexander pressed a button beneath the table. Instantly, a large screen on the wall lit up. Hidden camera footage filled the screen. Elena whispering conspiracies into her phone, Richard boasting about replacing his brother, their intimate conversations about seizing wealth and power. Gasps erupted. The directors leaned forward, eyes wide, some covering their mouths in shock. "For months," Alexander continued, his voice like steel, "I allowed them to plot. I allowed them to circle like vultures. And every word, every betrayal was recorded." Elena shot to her feet, trembling. "This is manipulation. He's lying." "Enough." Alexander's voice thundered, silencing the room. He rose to his full height, radiating authority. "I built this empire from nothing. And no traitor, wife or brother, will take it from me." Richard lunged forward, but security guards already waiting outside, stormed in and restrained him. Elena collapsed back into her chair, her face ashen, her carefully woven mask shattered. The boardroom buzzed with disbelief. Alexander scanned the room, his eyes sharp, commanding. "You wanted to see strength? Here it is. You wanted leadership? Here it stands before you. This empire is mine, and will remain mine." The directors erupted into applause. Richard was dragged out, shouting threats. Elena sat in stunned silence, her betrayal now public. And Alexander Kane, once thought broken and blind, stood taller than ever, his empire unshaken, his enemies destroyed by their own greed. Night descended over Lagos, but inside Kane Mansion the atmosphere burned with fire and vengeance. The same home where Alexander Kane had once sat silently, pretending to be blind, now stood as the stage for his triumph. In the grand hall, Alexander stood tall in a midnight black tailored suit, flanked by his loyal staff and security. The chandeliers above cast a golden glow on his face, revealing a man who had shed every trace of weakness. His eyes, sharp, unyielding, fixed on the two people who had tried to destroy him. Elena sat trembling in a chair, her once perfect emerald gown wrinkled, her golden jewelry now symbols of her failed greed. Richard, restrained by two guards, glared at Alexander with defiance, though sweat beaded his forehead. "You played me for a fool," Alexander began, his voice deep and resonant, echoing through the hall. "You whispered lies, plotted in shadows, and thought blindness meant weakness. But while you schemed, I watched. While you betrayed, I listened. And tonight it ends." Elena's lips quivered. "Alexander, please. I loved you once. I only wanted love." Alexander cut her off, his words sharp as knives. "Love doesn't conspire with a brother in the dead of night. Love doesn't sell secrets to competitors. Love doesn't mock a man in his own home." Elena broke down in tears, but Alexander's expression never softened. He turned to Richard. "And you, my own brother. Blood of my blood. I gave you everything, a life, a name, a place in this empire. And still you wanted more." Richard spat on the floor, his voice filled with venom. Because you had everything. Wealth, power, respect. And what did you do with it? Pretend to be blind. Pretend to be weak. You don't deserve this empire, I do. The hall fell silent. Alexander stepped closer until his shadow loomed over Richard. Empires aren't stolen, Richard. They're built. And this one was built with my blood, my sweat, my sacrifice. You will never understand that. And for that you will lose everything. With a snap of his fingers, guards dragged Richard out, his shouts echoing down the corridors until they vanished into the night. Alexander then turned back to Elena. She looked up at him, eyes red and desperate. Don't cast me aside, Alexander. Please. I can change. I can be loyal. For the first time, his expression shifted. A flicker of sorrow quickly hardened into steel. He leaned close and whispered, his voice barely audible yet carrying the weight of finality. A queen who betrays her king can never be trusted again. Two guards stepped forward, gently but firmly escorting Elena out. Her cries echoed, fading into silence. Alexander stood alone in the hall, the empire once threatened now secure. The staff bowed their heads, their loyalty reaffirmed. Slowly he walked toward the massive glass windows overlooking the Lagos skyline. The city lights glittered like stars reflecting in his eyes. But even as victory wrapped around him, a shadow lingered. He knew the world had seen his display of power. Enemies abroad would not stay silent. The betrayal within had been purged, but greater storms were gathering. He raised a glass of brandy, his voice calm but resolute. Let the world come. I am Alexander Kane. And I will never fall.